Now, both of you, just to kind of refresh my memory, you were both raised in religion?
Mm-hmm. No, I wasn't raised religious. No, I was raised in a secular, but I went through my religious phase in my 20s and early 30s.
Okay. So this is good then, because now we've already established some diversity, right?
There you go.
And the two of you may have different perspectives on this, having grown up in different environments like that. K-lub should be joining us too, and he is also a parent, and I'm very interested in his perspective as well. So hopefully he can chime in on some of these. Laura, you didn't grow up in religion, so what was your take on raising children? Did you just believe in a secular model of parenting from the start and you were consistent with that? Or did you try to incorporate religious elements into your parenting once you were dabbling in religion?
So I didn't even think too much about whether or not my parenting was secular or religious, like at all. I didn't become religious until my oldest son now, but he was 4 or 5 at the time. And so when I started delving into religion, I didn't immediately like start shoving doctrine down his throat, but I did start sort of exposing him to the ideas. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was, I didn't even think about it one way or another at first in terms of, is my parenting secular or is my parenting coming from a religious background or what? But looking back on that time, because my parents were both previously religious, my dad was a Protestant Christian, my mom was a Mormon Christian. And so they brought a lot of that, even though they had left religion, they brought a lot of those values and those ways of raising children into how they raised us. So in hindsight, yeah, I think there was a lot of religious structure to our upbringing, like things like specific values that we had to be taught and specific behaviors we were supposed to emulate. Right. So I think looking back on it, I did include a lot of that in my parenting early on.
I mean, a lot of our culture and society kind of steals values and morals from religion. Like that's undeniable. A lot of our, even just customs and courtesies, saying bless you when somebody sneezes, something as simple as that. But when you say that you were introducing religious ideas, were you actually telling your child that there was a God, or were you saying things like, make sure you say your prayers at night, or like, how did this manifest?
Yeah, I think once I really got into Christianity, I just sort of introduced it as though it had always been like, oh yeah, there's this God character, and here's these books that you can kind of read, like, like children's Christian books. Mm-hmm. And here we're going to go to this cool church thing, and you're going to love it. And here's this Sunday school, and you'll get to color and play with friends and stuff. So I kind of, I didn't sit him down as a 5-year-old and say, okay, mommy's now become religious, and here's some new teachings that you're going to learn. I really just sort of made it part of our everyday life. But yeah, definitely things like, yeah, there's a God out there who loves you, and let's read this new book that I got you, and it introduces concepts from the Bible. So yeah, it was a little more passive and a little less, I don't know what you'd call it, like maybe someone who was raised religious or who was already religious previous to having kids mm-hmm. would have it be more structured. And for me, it really wasn't. It wasn't like deliberate or structured.
Now, I just want to ask you one more question on this before we get to Sunny, because I have a certain sense that this sounds much better to a lot of secular people probably, and hell, it probably sounds a lot better than a lot of religious people as well, raising your kid, not forcing your kid in religion, not dragging them to church, but just sort of introducing the ideas to them and, letting them absorb it. I actually think that is more insidious in some ways, because I feel like it is, and this is not anything against you, but this is just something I'm looking at the effect of this, because that's kind of how I was raised as well. And for me, when you're showing all of the shiny, pretty parts of religion and allowing children to come to it themselves and to see it as this wonderful, glorious thing without forcing them into it, I feel like it kind of gives them a sense that it's like that subtle indoctrination, to where it's really going to take, because you're only showing the shiny, nice parts of it. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I think it would depend on, I agree with like the sentiment of what you're saying. I think that if you make something if you don't force something on someone, the idea that it can become that much more attractive, like more of a choice and less of I have to. So I kind of get you there, but I didn't experience that with my kids. Like, especially because I moved from Christianity to Islam. And when I moved to Islam, I did the same thing where I'm like, I'm going to expose you to the mosque and what it's about. I'm going to tell you what it is I believe, but you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. You're going to believe as you feel led to believe as you get older. And I'm not going to tell you what religion you have to have. And across the board, not a single child adopted Islam. And across the board, every single one of my kids, my husband's kids they have more of a Christian upbringing on their mom's side. So they have more Christian influence. But on my side, all three of my kids, none of them ever believed in Christianity and none of them ever believed in Islam. And when I came out of both of them, they were like, yeah, that was mom's God thing. Like, I never really bought into it. So I guess it could be like subtle and really, like you said, it could be, what was the word you used? It was really good.
I think of the word I used, insidious, but maybe that was that may have been too strong of a word because that implies motive, I think. And I don't think that's necessarily what I meant. I guess I was just thinking of the well, it is the motive of the parent if they're introducing it, but
that could be an insidious tactic. It could be like if you're talking about a parent who is Christian the whole time and or any religion, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, and they choose that as an approach. And if they choose that approach in order to deceive their child or in order to get their child to not be so intimidated by it or to be more interested in it themselves, I can see that would definitely be I don't know. I agree with what you say. When you force something down someone's throat, they tend to reel back and reel away from it and be like, oh, no, you didn't just try to make me, this religion or that religion. But when you make it subtle, like, look at this, like, dangly, shiny thing in front of you. Don't you want it? Right? Yeah, that could be, you're right. The word insidious isn't the right word, but it could definitely be more damaging, I think, in the long run to get that child now to look at it more skeptically later.
Right. It may have longer lasting effects, but it's like you said, too, it could depend on just the personality of the child as well. And so none of your children, you said they rejected Christianity and Islam. So does that mean they rejected theism just altogether, or are any of them God believers of any God?
Not really. Like my oldest son says, like, I believe that there's a possibility of a God out there. And he has these kind of like vague concepts like, well, there might be a God that's like this or like that. But he's more like, he approaches it more in an open-minded sense and less of a, oh no, there's a God out there and here's what it is, but it's not Christian and it's not Muslim, right? He just has
kind of an agnostic and would be open to the deist God if there's evidence for a deist God.
Yeah.
Sounds like. Okay. How about you, Sunny? You said that you were raised in religion. So were you still religious when you were raising your children, or had you found your way out by the time you started having children?
So let me say that I was raised religious until about 8 or 9. And then my parents got out of the church. And then they would just say things like, we believe in God, but we believe that God is available no matter where you are. So it wasn't like religion was a big deal. And then as they got older and as we got older, my parents were very progressive. And so that became more important, their progressive ideals, than even thinking about religion. Me, on the other hand, I was actively seeking. We had talked about this actually on your other show. I kind of went to many different churches. I never went to an Islamic, I don't know if
the mosque.
Thank you. I never did that, but I did a lot of other things. And my oldest son, he would go with me, and he would go to the kids part of it, and then we would talk about it afterwards. And say, what our thoughts were. And he was fairly young, maybe 6, 7 years old. And we would have these interesting conversations. My daughter, when she came along, I had gotten to the point where I really wasn't going to churches. I was more trying out Buddhism and more Eastern traditions. But what was interesting is when my husband and I got together, my second husband and I got together, his kids had, his entire family was very religious. His ex-wife was very religious, although he was not. And that was one of the things he said he liked about me, was that I was alternative. In this area, that's all. It's alternative. It's like, wow, that's really thinking outside the box, was not being religious.
Mm-hmm.
And his son, his youngest son, was 5 years old at the time. And I remember we were in the car, and he said, "Hey, Sonny, do you believe in God?" And I went, "Oh crap!" My husband and I had not discussed this yet. And
how old was he?
He was 5.
5. Okay.
Oh.
And I'm like, crap. Okay, what am I going to do here? I said, that's a very interesting question. How do you feel? He goes, "Well, I believe in God." I said, "Okay, well, that's all that matters." And I was hoping that would end it, but no, he kept on. He kept on. And
5-year-olds are way too smart for that.
Exactly. And his one of his brothers was in the car, and he became very interested. He's always been a thinker and very quiet and just absorbs everything. And so he was very interested in looking like, what you going to say to this? And finally he cornered me, and I said, "Well, I personally don't have a belief in God, but it's okay if you do. I think it's totally fine if you do." And that started a whole conversation. It was very interesting. And so when I got home, I just let my husband know what had transpired. And he said, "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad he's talking to you." He thought it was great. And so we sat around the dinner table, and we had a family discussion about it. And that became a big part of our entire routine. It set it off, where we would have talks about physics and Neil deGrasse Tyson and all of these interesting talks over dinner all the time. And we always told them that their belief systems, that was them, and that's not something that they can necessarily control. It's whatever convinces you. And so we love them no matter what. They could become a Southern Baptist, and that's okay, or they could become a Buddhist monk, and that's okay, or they could be an atheist, and that's okay. All of my kids are self-proclaimed atheists. My son, that I took to all these different churches, actually had an issue in school when he first started, when we had moved in with my husband, where he was at school and someone asked him what church he goes to, and he said, "Oh, I don't go to church, I'm an atheist." And that was not something you said here in this area.
Right.
And so it caused some problems. And my mom said to him, "Well, why did you say that? Why didn't you just say, well, we haven't found one?" And he said, "Because I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be who I am. And if they don't like me, I don't really give a crap." And that's what he's always been, very strong-willed. And he's gone on to college now. He's totally fine. But we just had many, many discussions. That became the place where we, thanks to his son, his 5-year-old son, that started a kind of a nightly ritual where we just had discussions about anything and everything, no matter what it was.
Isn't it amazing that your 5-year-old religious son, the only person who's religious in your family, and could be the person that would be the catalyst or the initiator of a routine, a family routine where you discuss science and all of that? Like, it's weird how life kind of works out in that sort of way.
I love
it. He's a great kid. He ended up about 3 or 4 years later, telling his aunt, who was very religious, every time she'd love to have the kids spend the night with her, and then they would go to church. And one day, both him and my daughter said, "We don't want to go to church anymore." And she said, "Why don't you want to go to church?" And they said, "We don't believe." And she sat them down and was telling them, "Do you want to go to hell? And you need to get right with God, and blah, blah, blah." And they came back. He was very upset because he didn't want to hurt her, so he was crying. But I said, "Why are you crying about this? What is it that's bothering you so bad?" And he said, "I just don't want to hurt her feelings because I know she cares about us, and it hurts me that I'm hurting her." And I said, "Well, you don't worry about that. She's an adult, and you don't have to worry about that with her. She can handle it." And I had a discussion with her, and it was never an issue after that. But all kids are free thinkers and deep thinkers.
That's awesome.